get us kicked off here, I thought a lighthearted little icebreaker would be helpful. So a couple of questions. By show of hands, who in the room is saved? I'm just curious. Ruth is. Anybody else? Yes, Ruth. So, ooh, Donnie, don't get theological on us now. Let it sit with. You're supposed to point at people you suspect might not be. All right? But without judgment, purely in love. How about, you pray on this one, all right? How about this? Anyone in this room who will be saved someday in the future? Far more, apparently, than are actually saved currently. All right.
Isn't saving sort of an now and ongoing? Yeah.
Well, don't get theological. Come on.
I'm asking.
Final question. Who in this room is being saved more and more every day?
Oh, me again.
Whoa! This is so not a typical evangelical church. I always got to readjust. Well, good. That's encouraging. Because I don't think, honestly, if I pose those three questions seriously to most traditional, historic, evangelical, whatever word you want to give it, traditional churches, that I think would be precise opposite. I think I'd get a lot of hands on the first one. I think I'd get a few hands and some quizzical looks on the second one, and I'm not sure I'd get many of any hands on the third. Particularly in Protestant contexts, for 500 years, we've been trained to remember that here's what we know about salvation. It's a free gift. It comes to us. We don't earn it. There's certainly nothing you or I could do to be saved. Jesus saves us. We simply receive, which, there's so much truth to that, right? There's so much truth behind that. But what that would lend one to believe is that one is either saved or not saved, and if one is, and if one isn't, then just one isn't, because Jesus either does it or doesn't do it. And it would sort of make the second two questions sort of odd. Like, what do you mean be saved in the future? I'm already saved. I got saved, for me, December 18th, 1979. I was saved then. What do you mean saved someday in the future? And what would it mean to be saved more today? Am I supposed to work for something here? That's what those Roman Catholics do, not us, right? Until you actually talk to a Roman Catholic who says, no, we don't actually do that. But if you've been around Woodland, and I know most of us have been around for a while, certainly if you've taken DK, because this is something we really, really emphasize in here, is that what we around, probably for the last 10 years, have called the three tenses of salvation is a really important sort of paradigm for how we think about salvation here at Woodland Hills. And so for us, every one of those statements is important and true. And because one happens to be true, like I was saved, doesn't negate that I still will be saved, and doesn't negate that I am being saved, because Paul, the Apostle Paul, uses all three phrases, right? I just want to revisit this for a moment, because I think this will, I hope, give a context to why what we're going to talk about for the next 3 weeks is pretty important. Paul, in Ephesians 2:5 says that we, quote, past tense, have been saved. There's really important, beautiful news there, right? That you and I, if we have just said yes to Jesus, we've been forgiven. We've been liberated from Satan and his powers. We have been put into Jesus Christ. I'm not waiting to be put into Jesus. I'm in Jesus. Danny's in Jesus too. I mean, he's trying to find Jesus at the moment, but...
Keep saving.
I have been saved. You have been saved. In what sense? In the sense that Jesus already lived your life, died your death, defeated all your enemies, literally everything's done for you. And we just say yes to that and receive it. But Jesus turns around in Matthew 24 and says, and yet, kingdom people will be saved someday in the future. Way out there. wait, I thought I was saved. You are. But there's elements which, look, we're not saved yet, right? My body's not saved. Well, mine's pretty close, but Greg's body's... Really? You're falling out. Dude, he's having a bad back this month. But his back will be saved. Hallelujah. Resurrection's coming. Yeah, our bodies are not saved yet. Our transformation fully into the image of Jesus is not there yet. That will happen. It's called glorification in some theological circles. You and I were engaged or betrothed to Jesus, but we're not fully married to Jesus yet. That's Revelation 19. Our celebration of the full marriage is coming. So there's a future tense. But what I want to consider with you today is a dimension of this third phrase, which might be the most difficult for, like, we get the fact we've been saved, that, I get it, Jesus came to save us, and yes, heaven's coming. We're not there yet. Okay, those two make sense. In what sense, then, are you and I saved a little more today than yesterday, or not? And how might what we decide to do actually enable us to be a little more saved, yes, tomorrow than we are today, or not, depending on choices we make, depending on whether we cooperate with God as He is in the process of saving us, present tense, right? What's this talking about? My body is not going to look necessarily more resurrection-like tomorrow or next week or next month. I'm not going to be more in Jesus next year or next month. I'm already fully in Christ. What's going to change then that today, tomorrow, this week, this month, I look at my life, you look at my life. If you're my brother and sister, I have to learn to trust you to start doing that, not in judgment, but in love for me and helping me look at my life and ask the question, am I really being saved? What is that piece, right? And how we've expressed it at Woodland is we've used words like transformation. We've used words like reconciliation, not with God, that's already settled, but reconciliation with each other, with people in my spheres of influence. We've talked about words like missional, words like discipleship, words like community. And you put the three together, missional, discipleship, community, and we have our definition of church. All this present tense stuff does is it starts centering around this, our concept of church. Like something has to happen in the church for this to happen. Here's, I guess, a way I've summarized it in my own head. I think this present tense stuff is God is saving us daily by transforming our characters into the image of Jesus through the intentional human relationships we share together. There's the church right there. All of a sudden, it makes tons of sense to me why when Jesus was asked the greatest commandment, He couldn't give the greatest commandment. He had to give two. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength. This is the greatest and foremost commandment. He didn't stop there. He said, and the second one is just like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. On these two together, wrapped and bound in a strong, undeniable accord, depend all the other law and the prophets, other 611 commandments. All depend on these two. It turns out that I cannot love God well if I do not love His image well, because His image is my way of personally, with my eyeballs and my voice and my ears listening, that I experience the image of the God who is love. It's through you, and you through me. And it's not that I worship you, but it is that I worship God through and in the midst of our relationships together, because that's where love is concrete. And you spend a few chapters in the New Testament, it's hard to miss this. The one another's are everywhere. As soon as it starts talking about God, instantly it's now do to one another. Like, how many one another's are there? It just doesn't end, right? Right when you maybe think Paul is going to talk about loving God, in 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter, most of that's about loving each other. By that, we love God together. Iron sharpens iron. As you and I do the one another's together, we look more like Jesus corporately. Now, the early church, I think, got this I've mentioned in different contexts, I don't know, in this room, maybe with just us, but the book Rise of Christianity by Rodney Stark, who wrote it in 1996. When he wrote it, was an agnostic, didn't believe in God, but he was so interested how the early church could grow so fast in the first few hundred years. And one of his conclusions that took him 3 chapters to lay out was, well, near as I can tell, looks like the early Christians just outloved everyone else in the Roman Empire. They sacrificially gave their lives to plague victims. They invited women into safe contexts where that was not the case anywhere else in the Greco-Roman Empire. They took in orphan babies left by families who did not want another female child, left them out in the elements. The Christians would gather them, bring them in and adopt them. They just outloved other people in the Roman Empire. This is an agnostic. Just going, yeah, that's what happened. That's why the church grew. So I think the early church totally got, like, this being saved day by day is self-sacrificial, other-oriented, choice-based love together, and that transforms us into the image of the God who is love, the triune God, right? That's how we do this daily transformative being saved thing. It's not that we save ourselves, it's that God is saving us in the midst of us loving Him and each other, right? And then what happens? Well, as good Anabaptists, we know things really went off the rails in a lot of ways in the 4th century. First 300 years, all the Rodney Stark stuff, love, sacrifice. Not like everything was perfect, but man, they got the principle of soft sacrificial love. Once you merge cross and sword, once you merge church and state, once you don't need house churches anymore, because Constantine's given you all the pagan cathedrals for free. Just come on and take them. And they did. Well, all of a sudden, church is not something you need. Church is a place you go. All of a sudden, church isn't 24/7. Church is for an hour and a half or 2 hours on Sunday. And for 1,700 years, the church has labored under that is the dominant vision of church. Yeah, if we get around to other things, that's great. But that's church. Well, look, guess what? That might give you good theology and some encouraging hymns and some sweet worship time, but it's not going to be able to transform you day by day if church becomes an hour and maybe Wednesday nights if you got to really happen in youth group. Something happened that we apparently became convinced, both Protestants and Catholics, that we don't really need this. We just need either 4 walls and a sermon, that was Protestantism, or 4 walls and the Eucharist, that was Catholicism. Either way, God gives us grace. We kind of do whatever we want the rest of the week, as long as we come back and get fed and refilled next week. Not much in terms of transformation necessarily at all. So as I look back now through the last 1,700 years of Christianity, you see pockets of this, like occasionally someone will wake up and go, hey, we got to revive this thing. And you have moments of Francis of Assisi or John Wesley or different folks who kind of re-get this and go, we got to get back to this. But for the most part, it's large tracts of wasteland with an occasional blip on the screen of, we missed something significant here. I think God got a hold of us again at Woodland in 2004 to 2008, where it's like we lost something, I think, right? That's why God redid our whole heads on theology and Anabaptism and missing out the nonviolence piece and the church in a really unique way. So we're part of that, we have to wake up again movement, I think. So let's talk about Woodland for a minute then. What's it been like? How's this gone for us here over the last 25, 26 years of Woodland's history? I don't know what happened the first 3 years because I was in Milwaukee, but in 95, I moved back. Actually, I do know. Greg would send me an email every Monday morning after the church service. It was good news. Things were happening. But I got back here in 95, Kelly and I, 96, realized I got to get more involved. And so my first step in involvement beyond teaching a Sunday morning class or something was sitting in a room with Steve Van Sickle, about 13, 14 other people, having Steve take us through a 8-week maybe time of going, hey, we got to do more than Sundays. What I noticed every time I went to Sunday service here at Woodland that first year back is Steve, who would most often give the announcements and things, would say these words: welcome, he never said to Woodland Hills Church, not once. He said, welcome to the worship and teaching time of Woodland Hills Church. in that little class with the 13 of us on Wednesday nights or Tuesday nights, he explained what he meant by that. I say that, he said, because that isn't the church. That's a slice of the church. But he said, he goes, let me share with you my vision of church. And I remember in '96, Steve cast a vision of house church. He did. He said, my vision for Woodland is never forget the words, a networked association of house churches that we happen to meet on the weekends together and worship and teach. Already back then, God was using Steve to get into my head and a bunch of us in that room this concept that I think would take years for flowering, take years in Kevin Callaghan and others of us, for this to finally break out of the constraints of late 20th century small group mentality, right? Now here, I have nothing against small groups, man. We have had, still have, I think, some great small groups here. But we also know that they really pose some challenges in terms of doing this kind of stuff. When you start having a really great clique and small group, the last thing you want to do is lose that beauty and intimacy and vulnerability by inviting new people in. You got to start over. And you might get someone in you frankly just can't trust. So there's all the reason in the world when you got a great small group to close the doors, which I get, right? But that's not church. Conversely, if it's wide open, you never know who's coming through that door and how you're going to assimilate them in and what personality disorders they have and what just weird, quirky humor they have that really irritates you after like the first 5 times it's funny, but man, the 5th week you're like, I'm done with this, right? There's all the reasons in the world why house churches, as defined by New Testament, are really challenging, right? God led us through the meta model of small groups. He led us through the deep, intimate friends doing life together model. He led us through cell model. I mean, Scott and Shauna, we met because we met with Scott, who knew how to do a new vision of small groups, and he actually came up and helped us do that. Like we've been through and learned a lot and grown a lot. We went through the house church transition when the Anabaptist thing, after Scott was up here, and we all kind of went through this theological, and Kevin led us along eventually in this house church model of sojourners. We've done a lot of things. I think God's used a lot of things. We've learned a lot of things. But here's the deal. We still have to ask the question at the end of the day, how many of our folks, including us in this room, are in context of a relationship where this can happen? And I'll just go on record as saying, as I look back over my 40 years of being a Christian, there's been certainly times I've been in those contexts, other times I have not. Life has challenges. I could share why I've found that challenging, why my family has, why Kelly has. Every one of this room has challenges to being in these places for the long haul. So part of why we'd love to invite all of you as staff into a conversation the pastors have been having for the last 2 years is we've begun to kind of raise the question again, how might we create new alternative contexts to be able to have this happen? I guess I kind of think where we're at, is this fair, Janice? One model will never fit all, and the more options, the better for Christians to do this, right? Like, I mean, let's just brainstorm. What I want to do with the next few weeks, along with Shauna and Oshita, along with Rob, Mary's part of the team, Janice has really been a big part of inspiring this, is we just want to share with you kind of a journey the pastors have been on, I think, over the last 2.5 years.
It's really been 4. But
well, I need a clock this big just to tell me what time it is right now. So trust Janice on how long it's actually been. It's probably been 4, you're right. There was a day in Mary's living room, I remember, that was pretty important. That was 3 years ago. Like, there's been sort of moments where I think about, like there's sort of, whoa, like we get stopped again, no, this is important, like get back to this. Like having the church work on a weekly, monthly basis is important, but there's also these like larger conversations that are so easy to, the tyranny of the urgent sort of takes over the important, right? And so we bring this to you guys to kind of enter into this with us as we share sort of where we've come and actually an idea we want to float by you guys and invite you into processing with us and maybe experiencing with us and just kind of see, might God open up another context in which this sort of thing could happen? Not replacing house churches or small groups that are functioning, or hey, families, like at least for 1700 years when the church wasn't much more than a building, at least the church often did encourage families to think of themselves as places of discipleship and growth. Not replacing any of those, but adding into so that we have alternative forms to fit into the crazy lives that we find ourselves in this hyper individualistic, hyper busy, hyper distracted culture that we live in. So, let me take you back to where this conversation started for the pastor so you can kind of get our heart behind it. And where this started is we became concerned, have increasingly become concerned over the years that the Woodland Hills Church covenant that all of our covenant partners say I do to every May, that has had a set of terms that we say yes to, all of us, since 97, I think, is when we started this thing. It's been a while, over 20 years. As we as pastors were looking at those vows again and asking the question, how's this going? How are our covenant partners being supported by us to actually live these vows out? We felt some real challenges. Like, look, here, you know I love covenant, right? That's my thing. But I know this about covenant, every covenant, including marriage covenants, which is the only one almost anybody thinks about in our culture. Covenants are beautiful things. And if you get the right terms, the right promises to the covenant, man, they can be super beautiful. But the problem with even beautiful termed covenants is the theory can never become practice. That's totally possible. The words on the page or at the altar on your wedding day can sort of float around in your heads forever and never actually become lived experience. And it doesn't just take a divorce to show that. A lot of marriages that are doing okay are still falling way short of the aspirations of those beautiful promises that day. And so, hey, if that can happen in marriages that we actually kind of do understand in this culture, how much more in a church covenant, which a lot of people just like, where does that fit? And how would you do that, right? Like, it's a challenge. Let me walk through the covenant with you and then focus your attention particularly on the ones that really have bothered us. I mean, all of them we felt as a pastor team needed like an explanation better than maybe we have before, but the last one's the one that we really kind of settle and go, what do we do with this, right? So here's the covenant. And by the way, as staff, right, the idea is all of us would be covenant partners. I'm not sure if all of us are technically, but that's certainly our goal. Is that how many covenant, is Jody here? Jody, how many covenant partners on the rolls these days? 360? Okay. So the covenant partners are kind of the core of our church, right? We know from demographics that our covenant partners are the people who are most committed, do most of the volunteering, give most financially. Like, these people have been living up to a lot of the vows here. And it's a rather small number compared to who attends on Sundays. And here's the vows. As a follower of Jesus Christ, I recognize the biblical call to and spiritual value of covenant relationships with other Christians. I choose to unite in covenant with the local body of Woodland Hills Church. Kind of a preamble. I have read and affirmed the statements of mission, vision, values, and faith, and I commit to, and here's the commitments now. 1, to follow the leadership of Woodland Hills as they seek to accomplish the mission. This, of course, whenever I have taught this class through the years, I explain clearly what we're not talking about is sort of blind followership, criticalless followership, rather engaged followership. Being willing to challenge leadership if you see them like if you're concerned about stuff. There's an active followership that really is absolutely crucial if any leadership is going to be effective. To live a life that is consistent with Scripture. You know, when back in 97, we asked the question, what should our lifestyle statement be? Well, we do have this controversial issues list, but you'll notice that's not one of the things we say you have to affirm up here. We specifically decided that. Like, we'll let that be known, like where our leadership stances are in things, but we've had people who absolutely are covenant partners and have some issues with certain of our controversial issue statements. What we did say is we want to be able to rally ethically and morally around the Bible. Now, you might say, yeah, but there's different ways of interpreting the Bible. That's right. And so if there are legitimate debates on what verse X means for sex or money or whatever, well, then that forces us into conversation together, right? Well, and that's what we're doing as a staff together on sexuality. We're taking the Bible seriously, but there's serious people who take it differently. You got to wrestle through that stuff. It brings us back together around the Bible, this statement. To use my spiritual gifts in ministry, either inside or outside of our church. Using a spiritual gift isn't an option if you say yes to this, but where you use it, that's up to where God calls you. To support the ministry of Woodland Hills through prayer, attendance, and as the Lord leads, meaning not necessarily the Old Testament tithing 10% requirement, but rather as God leads you in finances as well. Now, each of these we took time over the last year or two to kind of, together as pastors again, to articulate, to explain to ourselves what are we really asking here, how can we clarify this for covenant partners in the future. Relatively easy compared to this last one we'll now look at. Here's the one where the rubber meets the road in all this, I think. We promise, we commit to practicing right relatedness with God and others. There's loving God, loving others, the great commandment, by maintaining relationships that are characterized by covenant trust and faithfulness, by avoiding dissension, gossip, and self-centeredness, and by doing all I can to heal broken relationships. If any church just did that one, well, one, they'd be doing the great commandments, loving God, loving others. Two, they'd be back to Rodney Stark's instance of the early church that, hey, that's what radically changed the Roman Empire. That's all it took. Like, this is the center. If we're like doing good in attendance and everyone's following our leadership, but no one's doing this, where are they following us and what are we leading and why show up, right? For us, this is the heart of the gospel. This is the heart of why Woodland is here. And this is where we start asking the questions, how are we as leaders, staff, overseers, helping this happen for our covenant partners? Now, I think we can say, well, a lot of them come on the weekend or at least podcast, and we give them encouraging kingdom messages and challenges to go out and do that in their worlds. Okay, that's good. But how are we as a community doing this? Not just in families out there, not in their workplace, all of which is good, not just in their friendships, who they may or may not have, not like, how are we actually creating context where this can happen amongst us in a way where the church does this? Not just a nuclear family, not just a couple of buds, not just, well, I try to be a light in my workplace, all of which is kingdom. But until there's an us, not just a bunch of eyes, but an us that looks different, there'll be no communal difference. How you doing, bro?
I'm sorry, I'm having a reaction of some sort. I'm
A rash?
really nauseous. Yeah, and so I was trying to contact you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what it's pleasant.
All right, well, we love you.
And Oshita's really hitting the wall too.
I know, we need to talk about that.
Yeah,
Okay.
so there's something going on. Sorry.
A rash. Where's your rash?
Choose community, Greg.
Just not this one.
Just not today. Not this one.
I'm not feeling very well, Mary. Just all of a sudden, too.
You feel fine, Dan. You feel fine.
So this is the conversation that the pastors have been having for 4 years, probably. Janice is right. And began to catalyze more specific conversations, and actually an idea that Janice, it was kind of birthed in Janice, I think, that's pretty clear, that she began to bring to us And if you've been around here a while and you know that Janice has something that's a strong burden, you listen. And if you don't, you will after like a year or two. She'll get you to listen. You did wait 2 years, sort of. Anyway, so yeah, this 3 weeks is to sort of let you in on what Janice began to be birthed in Janice. But honestly, I remember the first few times she shared this thing with me, because of some stuff I did with Covenant, it did resonate. I wasn't sure what to do with it, quite honestly, like how to operationalize it, but it resonated. It made sense as a category. As pastors, we've continued to think and pray on this and ask, what does this mean? And like I said, we're sort of to the point where we just want to bring it to the rest of you guys and go, what do you think? Here's what we're sort of seeing. Do you think this is something we can explore together? So what I want to propose, here's the way it's in my head, is like it's a new idea, but then when you think about it, no, it's actually a really old idea. It's just an idea that hasn't been around or hasn't been tried for a while in the ways that we're going to propose we consider this. And at this point, you might be going, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. It's that big famous idea Greg had some time back.
Skate park.
No, that correct doctrine minus love is worthless noise. But that's not the one we're talking about today. That's a good idea.
Look at, oh my gosh.
Like, I found this online. Like, what is up with this guy? Anyway, it's not that idea. It's this idea. Not Greg Boyd, but C.S. Lewis. Now here's the question. What do you think Lewis is talking about here? This is a quote from Lewis. He's talking about something. Can you imagine what it is? The modern world ignores it. What? Nothing? Shauna? Oh. We are talking about sex today. Okay. We treat it as something quite marginal, not a main course in life's banquet. It's a diversion. We use it as something that fills up the empty spaces of our time. If you get around to it, yeah, I guess it's good. Not something you put front and center. I don't know, what do you think you might be talking about? Any ideas? It certainly is a form of relationality, but for Lewis, a specific one. Pastors, you cannot speak at this moment.
Probably a Christian discipleship mutual.
Again, like relationality, I think that's where he would want to go with this, though I don't think the category he's thinking of, most people would think that.
What in the world?
What is it? What could it be?
Friendship.
Oh! The big reveal. Are you serious? Did you just guess that?
Well, I mean, I kind of, it was, I read there's context, because I knew we were talking about that.
All right.
You kind of teased it last
Did I?
time.
All right. I hope you'd forgotten that. Otherwise, this whole thing, that was meaningless.
But it makes sense with this quote.
All right. Yeah.
Okay, go back to his quote now.
I don't know that a lot of people would say this out loud.
I think of Netflix as the thing that fills up the
This was before Netflix, though, right? Friendship has dropped another level now, and Netflix has now replaced it. Yeah, so basically, yeah, what we want to do over the next 3 weeks is cast a vision for something that actually in the early church wouldn't have been a surprise at all at this point. But if we're honest, at least if you're at all like me in our culture, when you see this category, you don't think, at least I don't think, didn't grow up thinking, oh, that's the context I would look for deep, profound, discipling, missional, like church, house church, small groups, not friendship. I mean, friendships are sort of something that will probably happen in there, but that's not the point. Friendships are sort of an extra add-on you get because you're in a missional community or something like that. Not that friendships itself becomes the center hub of a relational way, a missional way, a discipleship way of living. Here's the claim I want to make. That for many centuries, like early centuries of Christianity, friendship was an important relationship for spiritual growth and discipleship. Not a secondary thing that happens in another context, a mentoring group, small groups, Bible study, prayer and worship time. Oh, and we get friends there. No, you think first off friends, like friendship is the context. That's how it was in large parts of the ancient world. But the modern church has not captured that category as central to that. It turns out that we have other categories that do that, and friendships we hope grow out of that. What I'm proposing is we think about a reversal of that. And if it seems sort of nebulous what I'm saying, I get that because it does to me too, because I've for so long not thought about friendships in this intentional a way. We'll get into, particularly tail end of today, Sean is going to lead a conversation, and a lot of next week of why is it that friendship has become, in one sense, like everyone would say friends are important, I'm guessing, in this room. No one wants to go, well, I don't have a friend and I don't care. I mean, everyone, right? Like everyone wants a friend. But there's something weird, let's be honest, isn't there? About waking up on any given day and going, I'm going to find me a friend today. Like, I'm going to make this an intentional part of my life. See, if it's intentional, it's weird, right? Because friendships, they're supposed to just naturally just happen. People are supposed to pop out of the woodwork liking me and me liking them. Now, if not, I feel really bad about myself. And if some don't do it when I want them to, I judge the heck out of them. But there's no intention behind that. It's the laissez-faire nature of friendship that makes it friendship, right? Like, it's supposed to just be natural. What other relationship do we treat like that and expect it to work? Not employer-employment relationships, not marriages. It's the weirdest thing we do with friendships. We have to explore that. Here's what we're going to try to do over the next 3 weeks. I think we need to deconstruct friendship, at least modern versions of it, and reconstruct our understanding of friendship if we want to recover it as an important kingdom relationship. I think it might accidentally be an important kingdom relationship for many of us. I'm proposing we don't leave it to accident. I'm proposing we make it intentional, front and center. And if we do that, know this, we will look weird. We will be talking about friendship in ways that no one else in our culture is. At least very few people. Though, interestingly, some are. Shasta Nelson is getting some pretty serious, right? A woman who's going, hey, let's be intentional here. And apparently a real hunger there when people hear this. So we actually might be able to get some people to rethink things in ways that are really important to them. If we can recapture, how about putting it this way, what Jesus had as a vision for friendship. We often don't realize Jesus had a distinctive vision for friendship. I'd say we have almost entirely lost it. But could we recover it? That's where I want to go. So just today, with the bit of time I have, and I'm going to be turning this over to Shauna to help us in a conversation around what obstacles do we face to get here? Because there's tons of them, I think. But before that, I want to cast a vision from the ancient world to get a flavor of what it used to be like for most of human history. We tend to think that however things are, that's how they always were. Not for friendship. So I want to do 3 things here. 1, what was friendship like in the ancient world? Let's you have a flavor of that. 2, what are friendships in the Bible? Like, what does the Bible say about it? I think it's so easy to miss this stuff. I want to put some clear verses out here and some examples that really challenge us. And 3, why have we lost this? And by lost, I mean in the last 110 years. If you want a year, I'd put it roughly at 1910. And I think there's some reasons we can point to that decade why friendship was lost in the modern world. 3 things. Ancient world, Bible, what happened to us in the last 100 years. Here we go. I'll start with a C.S. Lewis quote from his book, The Four Loves, one love of which is friendship. To the ancients, friendship seemed the happiest and most fully human of all the loves. That's a crazy quote. Because guess what one of the other loves are? Eros, the love that fuels marriage and romance. In the ancient world, it was not romantic relationships that were the highest, it was friendship. Just think how our language betrays our beliefs about that today. No one says, if you're with somebody, are you just dating? They will say, are you just friends? Notice the just, where the just goes. The just is the mere, the less than, the unimportant. We want the romantic relationship, not just friends. But no one would say, oh, are you friends yet? Or are you just dating? Right. We laugh at that. They would have laughed the other way around. The crown of life, the school, here's a key, school of virtue. And he's talking about not just Christians, he's talking about Aristotle, Plato, the whole ancient world taught this way. That if you want your character to grow, you look for friends. Like, that's the context in which this happens. The modern world, in comparison, largely ignores it. So let's go to the four loves. Just to refresh ourselves, right? This is stuff we talk a fair amount about at Woodland, but we usually do this to focus on agape. I want to focus on a different one today. The four loves. Storge, affectionate love. Typically in the Greek language used for family relationships, so affection you'd have for a family member. What it's trying to distinguish from is, but not erotic. So brothers and sisters have storge, not eros. It's not sexual, it's not romantic. Brothers and sisters have affection for each other. They feel close, but it's not anything that's erotic. It's not romantic love. So those two are really important to distinguish in a family versus romantic context. Now, of course, husband and wife, they would add to their family storge eros. Yes, husband and wife have that, brothers and sisters don't. So the ancient world's trying to sort out what's these attractions we have to each other, these caring feelings, how do we be clear about what they are? There's the first two. Here's the third one. Philia, non-family members, but not erotic. Not just family affection, not erotic. What is it? It's something else. Let's call it philia, friendship love. And this is what C.S. Lewis said in the ancient world became highest of the loves. And of course, as Christians, we strongly emphasize agape because that becomes the one Greek word the early Christians used to talk about this really unique Jesus love. Other-oriented, choice-based love that seeks the ultimate well-being of others, including one's enemies. That's the only love you're going to give to enemies. Powerful love. But we often in Christian circles so elevate agape that we sort of sometimes ignore or denigrate some of the other loves. I think what I want to suggest is, what if we combine, we often talk about combining eros and agape, like healthy marriage. How often do we talk about really combining philia and agape? A different kind of love that's for friends, and that friendship now emerges as a really powerful category. Basically, philia is what we're going to talk about over the next couple of weeks. I want to give you a sense of, and these aren't Christian folks, right? These are just actual pagan, like they worship Greek gods. But notice what they think about friendship. Cicero, around the time of Jesus. We need friendship all the time, just as much as we need the proverbial prime necessities of life, fire, and water. That's where Cicero puts friendship. Friendship is, quote, the most valuable of all human possessions. Not marriage, friendship. Not children, friendship. The bonds which nature has established to link one member of the human race with another are innumerable. Notice his claim here. But friendship not only surpasses them all, that would include brothers and sisters, parents and children, wives and husbands, a lot of ways, but friendship surpasses them all. Something so choice and selective that its manifestations are normally restricted to two persons, and two persons only, or at the very most, a very few. Just that one statement there challenges us in our culture at so many levels on relationships. One, it would suggest, why do we place friendship just naturally below romantic relationships, below marriage, below parents and children, below nuclear family. We just assume that. It's like it's under there, somewhere down. And why would we think, on top of that, that the more friends, the better? Cicero's saying, if you got more than 2, look out. Not going to go well. Interesting. Facebook friends, the more the better, right? How many go, gosh, I got 2 Facebook friends? And then you broadcast that on social media, right?
Yeah.
Seneca. Hey, Cicero was not like a whack job. This is just common. Here's Seneca, another Roman philosopher, statesman. Whoa. Push the right button. There we go. To lose a friend is the greatest of evils. Apparently not. It's worse than losing a wife. Can handle that one, but not a friend. For what purpose then? Oh, here's one. What purpose would I make a friend? What would the purpose be? In order to have someone for whom I may die. Any man who I follow into exile, remember back in the days, exile or banishment was the most terrifying crime, sort of capital punishment, like go from the country and never come back. I'll follow my friend in exile. I'll go with him and never come back. Against whose death I may stake my own life and then go and pay that pledge. I promise my life to you, and you know what? Something in me hopes you call that in someday so I can prove to you my love. I'll die for you. These aren't Christians. These are just ancient Roman guys going, this is what friendship is. It demands everything, but it gives so much in return. If you consider, here's a challenge. If you consider any person a friend whom you do not trust as much as you trust yourself, then you are seriously confused about real friendship and do not understand what true friendship means. This guy lived 2,000 years ago. But notice, he's not being an idiot though. Notice what he says now. Before we enter a true friendship with someone, we must assess their character very carefully. This is why he's going to say, have very few friends. Because the truth is, don't have a friend unless you can trust them. And it takes a long time to know whether you can trust somebody. Go slow. But once you're in, once we enter into that committed friendship with someone, we are called to place our trust in them. Now, the guy isn't using covenant language, but this sounds so covenantal. Take your time in relationships. Test them out. God tested his people. How can we not? He's omniscient and still had to test people. Test it out. Is it right? Do we have the shared values of trustworthiness and trust? Could I tell them anything and I know it will not turn up behind my back on Facebook with the other friend that they're using? Like a million ways we can take this very precious treasure of friendship and destroy it in about 2 minutes. Careful. Slow in. Slow out. Aristotle, who probably did the most work on this, wrote an entire series of books on friendship. Here's some of his insights. Without friends, no one would want to live, even if he had all other goods. Wishing to be friends is quick work, but friendship itself is a slow ripening fruit. It's got to be slow or it will not be a stable thing. The antidote for 50 enemies, one friend. That's good odds right there.
Yeah.
Right? A friend is a second self. These last 2 quotes almost start sounding like he's taken from the New Testament, but the New Testament wasn't written until 400 years later. Like this merging of people. What is a friend? A single soul dwelling in 2 bodies. The language that we are all familiar with of soulmate, at least I'm familiar with that because my Bethel students are very much praying for that. All 4 years, they're praying for their soulmate. What do you think they mean when what do you think they're praying for? Where do you think the word soulmate came from? Say Aristotle. It came from this quote. Aristotle was not talking about a spouse. He was talking about a friend. My Bethel students in 24 years have never met. They're looking for a friend when they say soulmate. That's how this is shifted. And I thought just for fun, you guys deserve a bonus Aristotle quote. This one has nothing to do with friendship, but it's, yeah.
Free, this extra one?
Is it what?
Is this free?
No, $5 a piece.
Oh, okay.
But it's worth it. It's so worth it.
All right, I'll pay.
Particularly if you're a parent. Any parents in the room? Okay. Just $5 at the door. You will believe it. You'll give me 10. You'll tip me on this one. Ready? This will help your marriage. Mothers are fonder of their children than fathers are because they're more certain they are their own.
Come on.
All right, there you go. That explains that whole.
Put that on the nursery wall.
Good old Aristotle. Let's move on. So, Aristotle didn't just have great quotes about friendship like the other guys did. He went on and he actually developed a theory of friendship. And so I want to share that with you. Because I think what we'll find out is what he says here interestingly matches some of the stuff we can see Jesus doing with friendship eventually. And again, Aristotle's hundreds of miles and 4 centuries away from Jesus, but some interesting tie-ins here. So what Aristotle said is he thinks for a real friend, now you'll notice the language, kind of real or true friendship. They would contrast that with false friendship. So they were very aware there's a lot of things called friendship, but they're after this true thing, this real thing, as opposed to these sort of pseudo-friendships. So he said a real friendship has to have 3 parts. Here they are. 1, they enjoy each other's company. Makes sense, right? If there's not some level of just personal enjoyment, and then isn't it interesting you say, why is it I can meet a person, for some people, in 10 minutes, I feel I'd like to hang out with them all evening, and I could share a bunch of stuff I haven't even shared with people I've known for 20 years. Like, what is that, right? Other people, you go, I've known them for 20 years, and they're my friend, but honestly, it still seems like work every time we get together. Like, what do I say next? Like, it's... So, what we never talk about hardly in our culture is the difficulty of friendships, but we all know the truth about it, right? When's the last time you ever heard of a weekend-long friendship crisis seminar? Or, well, my friend just became a marriage and family therapist, but I'm becoming a friendship therapist. No, I do not know there exists such a thing, is there? A person who goes into therapy for the single purpose of reconciling friendships. They enjoy each other's company. Secondly, Aristotle said, they are helpful or useful. He actually used the word useful a lot. They're helpful or useful to each other. Now remember, in the ancient world, he's not talking just about, yeah, I'm painting the house this weekend, can you give me a hand? In the ancient world, he's really got in mind the idea, if we're not there for each other, probably one of us won't be alive at the end of this year, right? Like in the ancient world with threats of disease, of famine, of external foes attacking your village, like, I mean, literally you kind of lived or died together. So he's talking serious levels of dependency. Like, hey, my wife might die of childbirth this year. Like the statistics there are crazy in the ancient world, right? If she does, and I got 7 kids already, is your family are we gonna kind of merge families so that we survive? You know, like there's just really heavy levels of community. So he's talking about serious help. But he says this at the end of these 2 points. He goes, hey, what I've seen is a lot of friends have these 2 things, but that's not real friendship. Why would you think Aristotle, and I think Christians, could be suspicious if that's all you have is those 2 things in a friendship? Love hanging out with each other, and you really even help each other, maybe sacrificially serve each other in lots of ways, but what could be a potential problem if that's all you have for the friendship?
What are you in it for?
What are you in it for? Now, you might be in it for really good reasons, but you might be in it for purely self-centered reasons. Absolutely so. I like this person, right? I like this person, I like beer, I like, you know, they make me feel good. And They're super helpful. Like they're useful to my life. So Aristotle said, this is not enough for a real friendship. You need this third thing. You need the fact that they together share a commitment to what he called the good. Now, Aristotle has a really interesting view of God, and he'll use the word the good to describe his God sometimes. His God isn't super personal. In fact, strangely, his God isn't even where we exist, though he created us. Go figure that out. But he's trying to say, there's got to be that God, that mysterious someone up there has to be involved, and they have to have a mutual commitment to pursuing growth together in character. Now, he didn't know Jesus, he didn't know the love commandment, but he knew that there's something about not being selfish that's good, and something about doing meaningful activities for others that's good. That thing has to be at the center of one's friendship, or it can always fall back into just total selfishness. And this is Aristotle, right? A pagan guy, 400 years before Jesus. So let's compare that to the Bible. And here I'm just going to move right from Old Testament through New Testament, real quickly here. Proverbs 17:17. A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born to adversity. There's something in Hebrew called Hebrew parallelism. So a way of sort of emphasizing or accentuating something. And what you do is you say something, then to accentuate it, you say the exact same thing in different words. And so it's usually connected by an and. A friend loves at all time, and a brother is born for adversity. Wait, are you saying a friend is a brother? Because a brother's a family member. That's a family term. Yes, I think this text is saying covenant friendships can raise people to the level of family. That's what a real friend is someone who isn't just a friend, but a friend, a real friend, is like a brother. I can trust them at that level. That's what Proverbs encourages friends to look like. Notice then this statement. A man of many friends comes to ruin, but there is a friend, one, who sticks closer than a brother. Isn't it strange? Proverbs agrees with Seneca that to have too many friends is really stupid. If you want real friends, you have a couple, very small number. The exact opposite intuition we have. What's going on there? We have to figure that out. Biblical models, I'm not going to say a lot here, particularly on this first one, because Shauna and Oshita are going to share really from the Ruth and Naomi story on another week, right? But this is an absolutely beautiful paradigm example of friendship. A mother-in-law and daughter-in-law who, in that culture, the only reason a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law would even be related is a son, right? Like that's the connecting point. Son dies. What happens to the relationship? Everyone knows what should happen. Once a son that connects a woman to a family dies, the woman should go back to her own personal network of family. Not stay here. That makes no sense. Ruth stays. But something has to happen for that to make sense, and it does happen with this profound, beautiful friendship we'll hear more about. David and Jonathan, this becomes actually the paradigm through Christian history for male friendships at least. David and Jonathan covenanting together. I mean, the last two people on earth that should be friends, right? If, in fact, anything, Jonathan should kill David as quickly as possible, because David's the one thing that stands in the way of him ascending to the throne of Israel. Instead, he covenants with him and promises to protect him with his own life, even against his father, who's trying to kill David. Just on a dazzling example of self-sacrificial love. And a few chapters later, as Jonathan is now dying on the battlefield, laying bleeding to death, his father Saul also dying, David, who you'd think would be dancing with joy now. God, how am I ever going to get this kingdom with that family on throne? God, you just took them out. Thank you. No. David comes up to Jonathan, holds him in his arms, and utters these words as he's dying. I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were very dear to me. Your love for me was wonderful, and these famous words now, more wonderful than that of women. And those words, a love greater than the love of women, has echoed down for 2,000 years through church history when men have been trying to express a deep, profound love for each other that is not romantic, but is no less important, no less serious, no less committed. The question might be for our last 100 years, where is that today? I can show you examples for 1900 years, but not so much since 1910, the last century and a decade. Jesus. We miss this so often because it's not like pushed in our face, but if you notice what he's doing and then read the word friendship or friend or one whom Jesus loved, you start to notice Jesus knows how to do friendship, and he's being very intentional. Look, imagine the 12, right? And you're not Peter, James, or John. You're one of the other 9. You got to be at some point going, "What, you don't like me? I'm not funny enough?" What, Peter's has the jokes. John's got the charisma. What's wrong with me, Nathaniel? Every time something really cool, you go, "Hey, you 3, come on." Mount of Transfiguration, Garden of Gethsemane, the 9 of us are going, "What the heck?" You know? Now, was Jesus being mean? It probably felt that way, honestly, if you were Nathaniel, right? Let's be honest. God goes away with those 3. I'm left with these other 8 yahoos to wait till they get done with their cool mountaintop experience. But no, Jesus knew as a human being, which he was modeling and living as a final human, how to do friendship. And he apparently believed the same principle that Aristotle and Proverbs did. You got to have a small inner circle. That's the way relationships work. We'll have to process that, but that's what he did very clearly. It's when the ministry was ready to go out, he still sent the 12 out. It was the 12. But those 3 got special attention. What was up with that? He shares stuff with these guys he just does not share with everybody. Same thing with some people not in the 12 and some women. Mary, Martha, and Lazarus become this super special little family to Jesus. One place in Scripture where it says Jesus weeps is over the death of Lazarus. And guess what? It's not because Lazarus died. He's going to raise him in 10 minutes. It says he wept because of the sorrow he saw in Mary and Martha. He's weeping over their weeping for their brother. He's in this family with them. He's like a brother. These are profoundly deep friendships he's developed. He just knows how, and he crosses gender lines. That's the weird thing about Jesus. What you may or may not notice from all the Seneca and Aristotle quotes is they assumed friendships with men are with men, never with women. Women are inferior creatures. That was super clear in that world. Not for Jesus. Peter, James, and John, Mary and Martha. Exactly levels that whole gender distinction in terms of who's more valuable as a friend. Jesus trusts women to be friends of his. Most men, women, because oddly, it's so bizarre because it's so flipped in our culture. In our culture, particularly in Christian culture, women are expected to be the ones sexually that hold the line. Like if you're dating women, you hold that line because you know men. That darn testosterone is just going to, they can't help themselves. In the ancient world, it was precisely the opposite word on the street. Women, you can't trust them. They're out to seduce all of us. We're strong and we don't do that stuff. We'll stand up, but those women, they're always trying to seduce you. There's whole tracts written to fathers warning them about their seductive daughters who are going to try to seduce all the men in town. Keep your daughter locked up, otherwise she'll screw all the men up. Like seriously, that was the word. Jesus comes and he trusts himself. Jesus trusts himself, an unmarried prophet, to wander around the towns of Galilee on the road with women. This is crazy. But he risked it for the purpose of dignifying women. Here's his words on friendship. This is like he's going to the cross in like 2 hours. This is his last speech to his disciples. This is my command, that you love one another as I've loved you. No one is greater love than this, than to lay down one's life for one's friend. You are my friends if you do what I command you. Jesus is taking these guys who think of themselves as his servants, as his mentorees, as his future ministers, but not as his friends, because friendship was a hierarchical thing in the ancient world, and they knew he was master and Lord, and they weren't. So they never think themselves as friends. That was a very much only with peers thing. In this moment, Jesus is going, I'm raising you up to the level of friendship. Now, I think what he's saying is, I've treated you this way for 3 years, but I am now letting you know, you need to realize we're in a friendship relationship. It is Lord and Master, it is also brothers. And that's why Hebrews calls Jesus our elder brother. Not just our Lord, but our elder brother. We are family and friends with him. I do not call you servants any longer. I'm giving you a new revelation here, guys. Because the servant doesn't know what the master's doing, but I call you friends because I've made known to you everything from the beginning, or everything I've heard from my Father. And he had been doing that from the beginning. He had been being their friends in his cultural context, but now he's like explicitly saying friendship is going to be a category we use in this community between you and me, so clearly between all you guys. This is going to be a profound way in which we do kingdom. I'm just going to say a few words about the decline. Like, what has happened then? Why was this like the case for literally thousands of years? That these deep friendships, and then something has profoundly happened. Deep, intimate relationship for thousands of years. Same-sex friendships, usually, right? There was less commonly for men and women to be friends, but a lot of same-sex friendships. Yet, here's what we saw for up until just 100 years ago. Strong bonds of commitment between same-sex friendships. People generally attracted to friends' character qualities, not like what sport they enjoyed watching for which season, or what jokes they told, but what kind of person they were. Were they trustworthy? Were they faithful? These sorts of, it was character qualities. And then they were able to be verbally and physically affectionate at really, really profound levels. Yes, even for men. So they combined philia, that friendship, with storge, affection. They were not afraid. See, they were able to say, we can have philia, agape, storge, and have that deeply and richly without getting freaked out and going, oh no, is this eros? And having guys go, oh, I guess, hey, come on, man, we're men, right? That was not a reality until, I would say, 1900, 1910, where people started to allow fear of what could happen to diminish their actual lived relationships with deep, affectionate, verbal, touch. Let me show you what I mean. This was when photographs had been developed, not that long ago. You sat for a picture with your leg draped over, your hands touching, holding, laying together. This is just how pictures were taken in the early days of photography when friends took pictures. Here's some letters that were written by rather famous men, Ralph Waldo Emerson, right? Major American, to a friend of his, Malcolm. Malcolm, I love thee more than women love. He pulls David's line there for Jonathan. Pure and warm and equal is the feeling which binds as one our destinies forever. Theodore Weld wrote this to his friend Stuart. I can hardly trust to speak or write of him. He's writing to a third person about him. So is my whole being seized with love and admiration of his most worthy character. I can hardly talk about the guy. I'm so excited about my friend. Or Theodore Tilton describes his friendship with Henry Beecher Wood, one of the most famous preachers of the 19th century. Said, so many kisses, send some more. I toss you a bushel full of flowers and a mouthful of kisses, talking about his letters that they exchanged together. Tilton said, I love just to gaze into Beecher's eyes. I saw a picture of them with one of them sitting and the other on his lap, and they were just looking into each other's eyes as friends. Now, Greg's never done that for me. Not in 32 years. Now, we all know why, right? What if? What does that mean? Hey, look, intimate same-sex friendships were generally free of the suspicion or fear of becoming erotic. This was a pre-homophobic culture, right? Let's just say it. Until 1896, no one categorized anyone's person by their desire. And so there was this freedom to go, hey, there's lots of ways of being affectionate. All of those things you just saw in our culture would instantly be sexualized. They were free of that. And we have lost the ability for two men to sit in each other's laps, look into their eyes, and express their words as bushels full of kisses without all of us going, oh, that's awkward. What's happened to us? We're the weird ones, folks, because for thousands of years that was just normal. But here's what's weird. How come I can do that? How come I did do that? Not with Greg. I could never bring myself to that. But why could I do that with my 2-year-old son and my 4-year-old son and Jordan when he was 6 and 8 and 10? Why is it weird now when he's 20? It's certainly, I didn't confuse myself, am I a pedophile? When at age 4, I'm holding my little son and stroking his head and telling him how much I love him as I gaze in his eyes? No, not once. How come I can do that and that not be sexual at all? But all of a sudden you put me in a category with an older man or even my son a few years older, I just feel weird now. And I pull back, I've pulled back on my expression of affection and love for him. I do it in more manly ways now. He doesn't get the wrong idea. What the hell has happened to us? Seriously, right? Hell is a Greek word meaning Hades. It means Hades. So, in the early 20th century, we've lost this. There's a lot more we could say, but we're not gonna, because Sean is gonna come up. I'm giving you the problem. Sean is gonna solve it for us now. No. She's going to make it worse. She's going to help us realize all the other. What do you think, Sean? What should we do?
How much more do you have?
Oh,
Go.
no. Seriously?
There's more.
There's more stuff.
Well, okay. There's this book that I found profoundly challenging. It's a correspondence. This all is a series of letters by Ivy George, a woman born in India, and a good friend of hers who was born in Britain, Western culture, Eastern culture. And she just has this section that just blows me away. I'll just read a few sentences here. So this is the Indian woman writing to her Western friend. I'm struck by your recollection of the all-woman dinner party you shared with me having attended. My mind was on rewind as I reread that part of your letter. Indeed, it's an aspect of Indian social life that I sorely miss. After a lifetime of extremely intimate female friendships, I felt cheated once again by the adult Western world I became a part of. As I told you before, back in my culture, there were no boyfriends or girlfriends, just friends, and all of them were girls, for girls. Interminable phone conversations, spending days and nights together, picnics, family excursions, letter writing, sharing food, clothing, books, tutoring each other, private conversations were the order of my day. I do know that many of my wonderful friendships were rudely interrupted by marriage, and I have lost most of my friends now. I long for those possibilities again, but the world in the West is structured so differently. If one was to find such friendships, I would imagine they would act as a great buffer to some of the messy cross-gender connections that people in the West often seem to get into. The loss of female friendships is not only a personal loss, but a cultural loss for me. I'm also struck by the cultural perceptions of same-gender friendships in the West. In most cities in Asia and Africa and in India where I come from, to see a display of same-gender camaraderie is so natural. Men and men, women and women, laughing, holding hands, walking arm in arm, such affection is conspicuously absent in the West. When there is a show of such affection, it is necessarily homosexual and seen as taboo. Consequently, it seems as if the heterosexuals, for fear of being identified as a homosexual, refrain from intimacy with members of their own sex. There seems to be an implicit cultural assumption that normal involves either the absence of emotion and physical affection, or where there is such a thing, an excessive display with that with the opposite sex. What a shame. I can't help but think that to some extent, Such behavior stems from the compulsive heterosexist culture the West has become. Social intimacy must be strictly hetero and sexual. Such expectation is a marvelous recipe for the distortion among heterosexuals and those outside of this loop. We have people in the West lost the imagination to believe that close, intimate, same-sex friendships are possible. And this is a woman who just grew up 30 years ago in India. Like, it's still happening in India, Asia, Africa. We're the weird culture out on this, both geographically and historically, to not be able to recapture this sort of thing. So this is a 2006 study that I think captures well the realities that we live with today. Adult men report having the fewest number of friends of all demographics that were looked at. When men get together, they say they're more likely to do stuff than have a conversation. The male friendships that men do have tend to provide less emotional support and involve lower levels of self-disclosure and trust than other reported types of friendships, certainly compared to women. Though interestingly, young boys' friendships didn't follow this pattern. There was a researcher who's noticed that right around puberty and just after, like 12 to I think 16, she said, boys' friendships radically change and they become this. When men report having a close confidant, 3/4 of the time it's a woman, usually a wife or girlfriend. So now for men, oftentimes the only place they ever feel enough trust is in a romantic relationship, not in a friendship. And it's led to books like this, Friendless American Male, that's an entire book documenting the state of 21st century male friendships. And you want to say, well, women have the corner on the market then. And it's certainly true statistically that you females do better than we men do. But Marla Paul, Shasta Nelson, a number of women have said, hey, this thing is also affecting even female friendships in this culture compared to other cultures, times, and places. Here's a quote from Marla Paul, and she's not a Christian. She was a journalist, worked for the, I think, Washington Post for years, and just noticed that her friendships were challenging, and she did a book on this. She says, she's talking about women, two women now. We don't talk about friendship troubles. We're embarrassed about it, even ashamed of it. We blame ourselves, then we start to question our likability. We wonder why we don't have that fantasy group of friends that everyone else in the world must have. What women have to realize is that having a lot of close friends is, in fact, a fantasy for most people. Let's leave it here. Barna poll, 2008. Barna was asking, what's your dreams for your life? Well, one of the top dreams for 74% of American adults was having close personal friendships as one of their main life goals. Turned out, when he asked how many were successful at each of the goals, 40% of American adults say that they're still trying to find a few good friends. So there you go. There's the good news.